So, welcome everyone to another one of our class Zoom sessions. We're lucky to have Don Brown with us. He did an unfortunate somersault and broke his neck, but he's coming back pretty strong. We're glad to have him with us. So, I'll give a brief bio to Don. You probably read it or know something about him, but he was an art history major at Williams, and he credits the art department, principally Faison, Stoddard, and Pearson, with his choice of graduate school and eventually architectural career. And in 1977, he founded and operates an architectural studio in Montgomery, Alabama, and has done more than 2,000 projects in the Southeast. So in addition to the architectural practice, Don has been an advocate on the national stage for the American Architectural Institute, and he's also chaired the development of an energy code that has been used for design and construction nationally. Unique to our class, Don is an Air Force colonel and combat commander. Pretty special. He's going to talk a little bit more about that later on. So he's here to discuss his career and some of the wonderful successes he's had. So Don, you want to take it away?
Will do. I'll try to recall some fun stories that would be enjoyable. I want to thank you guys that are on the committee that keep putting this on and putting up with the likes like me and others, Alan, Harry, Larry, John. Thank you for having patience. My oldest daughter's on the line as well. She's just listening in. She will serve as the family member fact checker. And if I get too prideful about something, I'll hear about it later. But she's listening. I live in Montgomery, where my family's been for 3 decades, three generations. My 3 children all went to school here, kind of a prep school, but they all live elsewhere. Their mother, Maureen, my best friend and bride for 53 years, passed away 3 years ago. And my kids all said, Dad, we've had enough looking after things. Please don't get into trouble so we don't have to nurse you. And I promptly, a couple of months ago, fell and broke my neck. And I'm recovering from that, but they had to do a fair amount of surgery to rebuild it. I can be accused of having a stiff neck in more ways than one. Well, I'm ready to begin.
We're, we're going to try to do this as a bit of narration. So I'll ask questions, and Don will fill in a lot of his history and activities. So we'll start out with ancient history. Why did you come to Williams? How did you choose Williams?
A family member of consequence went there. He wound up being the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. His family and ours were in business together through several generations and of size, and which is one of the reasons I went back south, was to decide what to do there. His name was Arthur Nims, and it seemed like a great place. I was in high school in Europe, south of Paris, and had never seen Williams, hadn't had a chance to get back to the country to do that. I just hopped a prop airplane out of Orly, flew to New York, went to Brooks Brothers to buy some clothes that I thought would apply. I looked like Beatles before the Beatles showed up, funny clothes, and of course immediately went to jeans and lumberjacket shirts and boots when I got to Williams.
And then when you were at Williams, how did your choice of courses, particularly the art major, influence your career?
Alan, did you find that picture? Or did that original? That's from 1965. How did why did you go to Williams to play? Next slide, please. Some of you may remember, Bob, I don't remember who was all on that, and Burke, who was on that team, but we went on. I've Got a Secret as the first intercollegiate skateboard champions. and we're having fun. That Kennedy had been assassinated, but the great events of our generation occurred a couple of years later. That's me going down a slalom course on a trash can, and my parents said, "What on earth are you doing?" Next slide, please. But we had fun, either throwing a frisbee or I think we were just trying to attract girls in the spring to come over to Williamstown to visit. We got rugby shirts, purple and white. Who all was on that team? Anybody in this class?
Yeah, I was on it.
Mm. Hit the next slide if you would.
Burke Booty was on it.
Oh, the Harry, go ahead and ask the.
I was on it. Sorry, it's Andy Bender here. I was on the team. Great time. Great time.
I just pulled that out routinely. That's my office, and a visit 3 years ago by the development team who were going around the country prior to the 200th anniversary, asking 30 of us, how did your Williams education inform your life's work? And that was enjoyable to do. Those were podcasts later. But Williams did influence my life's work. As an art history major, I obviously had the art mafia for faculty, Whit, Stoddard, Bill Pearson, Lane Faison, and they taught us how to discern good work, the differences between choices that reflected culture, ethnicity, building materials, economics, and was important. And that was very useful to me subsequently. Also, I enjoyed Williams because it was a place of rigor and energy. And I learned the value of passion, of hard work, making things better if you could, collaborate with others. That's been a common theme throughout the various tribes in which I've worked over time. I've had the honor of giving a commencement address on a large scale, 18,000 folks, and a series of other commentary notes to various groups. And those themes of being civically engaged to make a difference have always been part of that conversation.
Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about what civic engagement means or meant to you.
That very simply, and all of us, so many of you that have talked about this before have had that as your vocabulary as well. That's simply the advocacy of solutions that have some public value. In my world as an architect, most of my colleagues sit quietly in their offices and complain about not being appreciated as opposed to getting out and making a difference. That's not exactly been my style. It's simply advocacy for solutions that have public value. You simply identify a need, which is easy. You define a solution and you go sell it. And that's the common thread among the opportunities that I've had in various careers at the same time. That's the common thread that has been useful, entertaining, and enjoyable. We don't get to stay on this planet long. Hopefully we leave a few things that are worth it. I'll mention a couple that are important to me as well as some others.
Yeah, be interesting to tell us a few of the examples of engagement that were important to you.
I'll hit those as we go through.
Why don't you start with architecture? That's your main.
There are different buckets of things that we've been involved with: architecture, historic preservation, energy and climate. Huge piece, advocacy in general. There's an education component on the college level, and then this military piece as an adjunct. On the architecture piece, I wound up being in college for a decade. I had 5 years of active duty service. All of us were in that bucket. I was eminently draftable. If I wanted to get a degree in architecture, I had to get a commission available. I took an exam, passed it, maxed it, and they gave me a pilot slot. I wound up pinning on lieutenant's bars on a day after getting a degree, and a couple of years at Robins Air Force Base in Georgia, south of Macon. I volunteered for Southeast Asia, and they sent me to Tokyo. Darn. I spent a couple of years there, enjoyed it immensely, came back in 76, took the exam, passed it quickly, started to practice the next year, and have been at it ever since. Good deal of work, which I won't go through, but just a few things in this piece. But it's been thoroughly enjoyable. I love what I do. The American Institute of Architects is the primary organization that all of us as architects work through for some kind of national impact. There are more lawyers in New York City than there are architects in this country. There aren't many of us. The AIA has a larger percentage of members than any other public association in this country. It's the only game in town. I wound up solving one problem, working another, doing another, and wound up serving nationally for over a decade, and had the opportunity to have a variety of roles that I thought were useful. A large advocacy experience for a number of years, working the knowledge communities for a time. I was elevated to fellowship in 2011, which is 2% plus of our profession, and so I was our emissary for a number of years to Congress, to state legislators, to governors, which is an interesting group of people to try to communicate with. I wound up running podcasts, webcasts out of the public television studios in Arlington. That when TED Talks were brand new, almost at every convention for many years, on civic engagement and how to be effective in accomplish some public good. So it was not hard to do, and I was our Tim Russert for a number of years, and there's some fun stories there, but I'll tell those to you at the bar at some gathering we'll have near term.
It's fascinating, the work you've done in historic preservation. Maybe you could describe a few of those.
That I'd like to. There's some good examples here as well. I came back from Japan in 76 and joined a group of people that were one of the knowledge communities, one of the professional interest areas of the AIA in historic preservation, because that was a familiar subject. I had lived in Europe for 5 years total. There's a vocabulary for which we were familiar, and worked with one person in particular and wrote the draft of what was converted into the Secretary of Interior standards for historic rehabilitation, plus the original technical briefs. The updated version of which is the guidebook, the rule book for everything that the National Park Service approves ever since. It's been obviously improved, but there was what my Williams education gave me was a greater sensitivity to the issues that were core design elements in a building of some kind. So that original thematic piece is still used today in a longer form, but we wrote the draft, and I've never lost an argument with a reviewer because I know how it works. We've done a ton of work in that area. That's not a mainstream portion of our practice, but I've got a handful of projects I'd like to mention to you. One is the Tuskegee Airmen National Site. Met with the original Tuskegee Airmen for a time. I'll show you some pictures of that. We also are restoring the original church where Martin Luther King was identified as the guy that had to lead the civil rights movement, and another that is known internationally as the Gee's Bend Quilting Ladies. And we'll start with that. If you can put up those slides, Alan. You may not be immediately familiar with Oh, there's that one. The Gee's Bend is a little notch way west, about an hour west of Selma. It is in the Black Belt. It is isolated. It has no economic activity of consequence. And back in 1967, 68, ladies were quilting these extraordinary quilts in their own houses, front porches, and trying to sell them. The marketing manager for the New York department stores was trying to sell their product and said, "Gals, if you make these quilts so that they'll fit a common size bed, twin, full, double, king, then I can sell them." It wound up being an extraordinarily helpful business enterprise for 30 years. It was the main economic engine. Everybody benefited. That building was originally a house plan done by an architect who was the husband of the gal that was the marketing manager. He just loaned them a set of plans and they built it in the field. It was added onto and altered. Unfortunately, we're in the middle of correcting some of that, but it was a simple building that turned out to be the center of their income for that area and a sanctuary. That was a time frame in which, if you didn't know the number of jelly beans in the jar, you couldn't get registered to vote. If you were African American, you couldn't buy land. They were horribly mistreated by people that looked just like me, but they sought me out to help them with that. And the important work here is not so much about the architecture or the restoration of or the rehabilitation, but about the cultural heritage that needed to be captured, and then capturing memories while people were sentient and could do that, and then present those to the public so that next generations would know. We just had a festival 2 weekends ago with 2,500 people there that were visiting and looking at exhibits, and a ton of quilts that were out. Go ahead, Alan, and roll through some photographs. This is part of the panels of providing the history inside this building that one time were filled with sewing machines. Next slide, please. That's part of exhibits, both large scale and small. From time to time, there are workshops that are held there to teach people how to quilt and what the history was. Next slide, please. The lighting we're going to change and revert back to its original piece, so it had been cobbled together and repaired and beat up. We're altering those things now. We've gotten a series of grants from a variety of sources to be able to put this back into play. One portion of the building was used for childcare. It was the moms would show up and go to work, and they'd bring their kids. They put them in an adjacent wing, and somebody would look after them. So it was the social life of the cultural center, the community center, the political center for a wide area out in the Black Belt that was, and some of those original quilters are part of the board that we have the privilege of working with. Go to the next one. The next one is Mount Zion AME Church. That's what the building used to look like. It was built originally in 1899. It was updated. The roof was changed in it's funny roof, that piece between the two towers in 1921. And in the 50s, civil rights issues were becoming a significant concern, and it boiled over into the bus boycott, and the community got together and decided on who was going to lead the
Okay.
Heating up the Mandarin chicken for myself.
what was called the Montgomery Improvement Association, and they tabbed this 26-year-old preacher by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. And in that front second floor office, the corner facing you, was where he got his instruction. Then they went to that ground floor. That is the only portion that we've completely renovated up to now, and plans were made to continue. That's going to be a way stop to celebrate the march from Selma to Montgomery in a couple of months. Go to the next slide, please. What happens to back up one? What happens to these buildings when they're neglected? The folks that established that church and kept it going moved to another site, and it became abandoned for a time. They took the stained glass out and moved it to the new church, and the building was in peril of falling in. The walls were not connected to the roof framing. There were openings, and it was about to fall in. Literally, the walls were not connected to a structure. We had to go back and rebuild those connections and put on a new roof. Next slide. The interior had just fallen in. There was daylight. The balcony had collapsed. We've rebuilt the structural pieces, rebuilt the roof structure that's needed, and we're just cobbling together dollars as we go along. But again, this is not so much about the architecture. This is about the cultural heritage that should be captured and presented. I worked with the group that are the foundation board 40 years ago, walked streets with them on other things. And so it's a privilege for them to have confidence in us to go back and represent this. Go to the next one. This is the original Tuskegee Airmen Field. It was the site of the primary flying training for African Americans in World War II. That building on the left is the only hangar that's still remaining. The one on the right was demolished. That land was originally Tuskegee University land. The buildings were built by students, not very well skilled students. They retained rights to the property, and back in the mid 80s, the notion was to preserve that before it went to dust. The field that was the so-called Tuskegee Airmen Flying Field, where you see in movie form the red tails being flown, the P-51s, that was across the interstate from this location. And we know where it was. There's zero evidence of it on the ground. So we thought we would try to restore this piece. I walked 80 acres, decided where that line ought to be, went to the Tuskegee University to get their tacit approval to request that the Park Service put together a project to restore this. I went back channel to the Park Service to friends. We wound up developing a program for the restoration of this field. It became the largest Park Service project in the country. Next slide, please. And schematically, that building on the left was going to be restoration of the original hangar. The one on the right, midway, was a replica of the old one. We could air condition that replica as a new building so that the permanent exhibits are in there. Usefully, those other buildings with green roofs were some ancillary structures. The one on the lower right, I'll show you another picture of. That was the All Ranks Club. That was the cultural and entertainment center for the Tuskegee Airmen, and had next slide, please. That's the overall site plan. That was our game plan for restoration. Next slide, please. That's what it looked like when we got there. We wound up for a 2-year period having the original senior Tuskegee Airmen in our office on a regular basis. Absolutely wonderful gentlemen, professionals, salt of the earth, brave. Next slide, please. That's before and that's after. Next slide, please. That's an aerial showing from the visitor entrance portion up on the hill. The building to the right is the social club. It had a different name. And it was largely converted and altered, and we wanted to put it back in its original condition. And so our interviews and work with the original Tuskegee Airmen were the device by which, or the means by which we were able to reconstruct it as it originally was. Even though we cheated a bit, put a lift in the bottom so people that were in a wheelchair could get upstairs and see what was going on. Slightly widened some doorways to make sure they could get in. Tuskegee had converted these facilities for use as part of their veterinary school, so they'd made a mess of it. Restoring these were difficult. Slide, please. That's the primary building that we wanted to focus on. There's a P-17 in the building, the primary plane flown then. We had to create, we had to solve a lot of problems for access, restoring pieces, those iron skeleton pieces on the left side of the screen are representations of the ancillary buildings that used to be there that were support buildings, so people would understand the relationship between the two. We invented a new method of sandblasting, not with sand, the walls to get rid of graffiti. We had a great deal to fix. We needed to repair it and restore it in a way that looked like all those parts and pieces were there in the first place. The only alterations that we made were to some doorways to make them large enough for a wheelchair to go through. And it's a frequently visited site, but the story is what's important. Next slide, please. That's the All Ranks Club that was so important in the lives of the Tuskegee Airmen. And I'll end it with this. They told me, the conversation you've heard is about the Tuskegee Airmen was about V2, victory at home, victory abroad. But what they told me, Charles McGee, this senior, lovable man, wonderful friend who died at 101 just this past year, he said, we knew that if we worked hard, that if we applied ourselves and prepared, that when our time came, no matter what the obstacles, asterisk, asterisk, that we could be successful. They proved it. The whole notion that they were invincible, that they'd never lost a plane, was dogma until in our conference room, a historian from the Air Force Research Library at Maxwell Air Force Base, who had done his homework, great guy, visited with us along with the historian, went through documentation, and really discovered that there were a handful of circumstances where that was not true. And the Tuskegee Airmen absorbed that as part of their heritage, still prideful of an extraordinary career and an example that really set the tone for integration of the Air Force subsequently. Next slide.
Switching gears, Don.
Yeah.
Could you talk briefly about your work on energy and the climate?
Yes. The in the 80s, the issue came up. It was interesting. I wound up doing the programming and wrote the code for energy program that every project receiving state monies had to comply with. It was 90% of what we do today. Compiling weather data, you have to be a bit of a nerd to do that. But all of the strategies for dealing with energy transfer and energy use were included in those original software. It lasted for about 8 or 9 years until a unknowing commission director decided it was too complicated. You had to get approval both at the schematic and the final design level to be able to get your project approved. And we had to use a Radio Shack Model 16 with an 8-inch floppy because that's all we had then. Some years we also established a solar energy program in the 80s, demonstrations, numbers, went on tour. I went around the state and elsewhere teaching DOE's 2.1A energy program, which was BTUs per square foot per year. Uh, we we produced the largest ground source water-cooled HVAC system for a large company to illustrate how that worked to use very little energy. Became a PhD thesis project for a bunch of mechanical engineers as well. Forwarding to 2010, the International Code Council, the ICC, is the principal entity that promulgates the building code for our profession, for everybody who's designing and building. And I wanted to create an energy code. They were calling it the Green Energy Code. I developed a game plan, the budget for the AIA for its co-sponsoring of this energy code. And through a 2.5 year run, I spent about 2,000 pro bono hours. Everybody with a dog in the fight participated in the process. Every research lab, every rating agency or lab, ASTM, all the every institution, every manufacturer of a product, whether it's brick, concrete. There were hundreds of people participating in this process through a series of a half dozen meetings around the country. We wound up producing, put the slide up if you would. Alan will get it in a second. You've got to realize that building codes, not that one.
Prior.
That one right there. That was the book that was produced. We won out of hundreds and hundreds of people that were all building officials. Architects didn't particularly, they don't belong to that entity. We won votes for passage by 3 votes, 5 votes, 8 votes, 12 votes. Building officials were doubtful that architects could manage this process. I was asked to give the keynote speech at the adoption convention and led the AI team, which was hard work. But that particular reference, which has been updated, was covered for the first time land use and as well as just design strategies, all the metrics, the choices. It produced something that was very adaptable, adoptable. I gave lectures around 18 states in the country, TV work to describe what it consisted of, what its value was. And today, the same principles are included in subsequent codes. And what's really remarkable today, every architect in practice, particularly younger ones that are fluent in the digital world, we can design solutions in real time that include all of the metrics and algorithms having to do with design for energy transfer, envelopes, daylighting, equipment use, consumption, material content. We can literally dial in efforts to get to net zero with materials that take less energy to produce and don't create additional carbon. So that effort out of Hyde was something that I'm most proud of and was certainly worth doing. It has a legacy and has become part of our regular vocabulary today.
Just moving back a little bit to your experience at Auburn and Auburn as a learning institution and then Auburn where you were teaching. Could you talk briefly about that?
Sure. Just to let you know, Auburn was just a fallback admit. Didn't think I'd ever go there. Thought my career would continue. When the draft was in play, I needed to find a home. We had a very large family business, so coming back home to resolve that was something that others of you I know have had as a challenge. I wound up going to Auburn to see if architecture was really something I wanted to continue with. Got an Air Force commission. Wound up going through school and getting to be the senior cadet in Air Force RTC and also the senior guy in architecture. One fun fact is that I spent more time than I wanted my parents to ever know at WMS WCFM. When I got to Auburn, after a couple of years, we established a campus radio station that's now a TV piece. When I got to Auburn, I had the longest hair of anybody on campus, a Volvo with a ski rack on the top. Nobody knew what snow was. We had snow once, and so I put skis on top of my car and just drove it around the campus. I wound up thinking that Auburn would be easy. Not so. The students there were really good. They just didn't go north, didn't compete otherwise. I wound up chairing the Architecture Advisory Board with a group of very senior, accomplished architects. We created, under my chairmanship, what's called the Rural Studio, which is world famous. It got an award some years later, 2015, what we called in the AIA the Whitney Young Award, normally given to an underrepresented African American architect of consequence. Having 8,000 people applaud continuously for 9 minutes is just fabulous. It has provided an international example for how to teach, who the client really ought to be, what products you really want to produce as a result, and then how you go about that work. That was enjoyable to be part of. I currently serve as the chair of the College of Architecture, Design, and Construction's 13-degree program, industrial design, graphic design. It's a top 6 school. I was in a small search and selection committee for a new dean, which we just hired, a young lady from Rice, who's younger than my daughter that's listening today. But fabulous. Our first meeting of the board will be next week, 1 week from now. It's the value there is all about defining what you teach and how, so that what you're producing is relevant. Our faculty are absolutely superior, and they're from the Ivies and elsewhere. The standards are high. The School of Architecture has the toughest admit of any undergraduate curriculum, any graduate curriculum in Alabama from any institution. It's tough to get in. And the students are just really outstanding. All of them get multiple offers from around the country when they matriculate, and it's a privilege to be part of that. That commencement address was at Auburn, the only architect in the history of Auburn to be asked to do that, 18,000 people at a time. It's awkward when your face is in the basketball scoreboard and it's about 12 feet high out in front of you. You just can't look at it. Harry, we got 15. What do you want to do next?
I'd love to hear about your unusual parallel military career and how you became an Air Force colonel and a combat commander.
Well, it is those of you who have not been in the service don't appreciate the notion of covering your colleagues' six, looking after those that you're with. There's a sense of camaraderie and team commitment that is a bit unusual. I was fortunate while I was on active duty. My dad was in charge of Air Force primary flying training for the other 32 flying schools in World War II, except for the one at Tuskegee. So he had been in, left the service then, was recalled when Korea hit, and that was my first sojourn to Europe. So there was some history there. I came back to Montgomery. I wound up getting back in as a reservist to see what that was like. Was promoted to the commander way early, long before I should have been, and had a long series of being commander of a function. If you've seen the Hurt Locker, that's just one piece of what I got to work with. I was essentially a base commander, and then some. When you've got the lives of men and women doing a whole variety of tasks under threat, then you pay attention, you understand what their roles are, and you can get into that world and play that role carefully and thoughtfully. And I've stayed doing that. I have degrees from several schools that are master's level pieces, And these are about economics, political science, history. Oh yeah, you need to learn how to respond militarily, but the object is not to fight. The object is to find a way to deal with the components and pieces and communicate with others in the ecosystem to avoid battle. I sit on the board for the Air University now, which is important. We get to spend time with air officers that are senior and selected by their countries all over the globe on a regular basis, with speakers that are renowned, famous, and not obligated to follow a line of thought, or they're allowed to be to contest conventional thinking. So it's intellectually interesting. There's a commitment there. I serve. I run a building in Washington that is catty corner to Dirksen, Hart, and Russell. It is. I look out one of my windows and I see the U.S. Capitol, and the other windows is Russell and Dirksen. It's the Reserve Organization of America. I'm elected nationally. It's the entity that the biggest one. It's the only one that deals with all reserve component forces, regardless of service or rank. Collaterally, we support the Guard. The PACT Act that was passed last year to allow veterans to be looked after from the smoke inhalation from the garbage dumps in Afghanistan and Iraq. We led the effort to get that passed. I have an advocacy staff, and so those things that we need looking after in order to take care of the veterans, the active serving reservists, who are the majority of people around the planet that are in harm's way today. Our job is to look after them and alter, revise, and engage in advocacy for rules that will treat them fairly. So that's a piece. I look after the building as well as the advocacy component. When it's time to entertain and be the moderator for a panel including all of the reserve chiefs, the 3 stars that run all the services, I'm the guy that does that. So that's you switch hats, whether it's AIA, whether it's no matter what the event, that's it's the same process. You do your homework, you find out what the shortfall is, and you sell it. The guy that's the current chair of the House Armed Services Committee is a guy that I helped out when he was in the state legislature in Alabama. Walked streets, looked after him. He got to Congress, and now he's the chairman. So when I have an advocacy need to provide some parity and care for enlisted folks that are recalled from their jobs around the country and put in harm's way, guess what? He will listen. So advocacy is not just a quick effort. It's one that you work at for a period of time.
Don, I think many of us would like to ask you some questions about your career and your activities, but do you have any last words you'd like to leave with us?
Well, when I first got off the boat, so to speak, and saw all you guys at Williams, I said, "Oh my Lord, I've been used to being top dog in high school, and now I'm way at the bottom." You guys were intimidating. I hope some of you in your heart of hearts feel the same way. But you were incredible classmates, and at every round table of 8 people, where a conversation occurred, I felt like I had to work harder to even get to some level of parity. So what you guys stimulated in me was a desire to hustle, to work hard, and to prepare. And if there's anything I believe in, it's having a passion for what can make a difference on this planet. Do the right thing. Don't keep score. Do your homework. Be credible. If you're in Congress, you're advocating for something, credibility is everything. If you don't have it, you'll never get anywhere. Finally, you collaborate, because you don't get to do this by yourself. And I love the note about being humble. I feel like I'm a turtle on the fence post. I didn't get there by myself. I've always been enabled to get something done by the good men and women that I've had a chance to work with. The the Green Code was a big thing. We broke the ice to create something for this planet, and that's something we'll continue to work on as one item.
Thanks, Don. I think we open it up to our Zoom classmates now who have any questions. And if you use the reactions tab in the bottom of your screen, I can already see John Huffdale would like to ask a question or make a comment. Go ahead, John.
Don, thank you for a really nice presentation. And boy, you've done an awful lot of things in your career. And thanks for sharing it. I did have one question. Is we have a new art museum that's going up at Williams. Have you had a chance to look at the plans for that? And do you have any comments on it?
I've only read the article, and we talked about the other day. I'm aware of it. I've talked with an architect who was involved with that process. I can't wait to go visit it personally. I think the college has done a very smart and thoughtful job of staying on point for material and energy issues that ought to be paid attention to in this country. The buzzwords are sustainability, but what's being done on campus is very smart. They're charging their architect consultants to produce the best and finest examples that do more than being an art museum or a residence hall. And I can't wait to go visit and look at it personally.
Ted, do you have
Bob Conway what he thinks, because he's the curator.
Bob, you're muted.
Bob, you have a comment?
Your microphone isn't on yet.
By the way, Bob is in my favorite career field that I didn't have the skill set to really be successful in, so I went to the rougher side of being an architect. But he had one hell of a backstroke and was an elegant and speedy butterfly. He could kick my ass in the pool. I was on the swimming team for several years, wound up being a diver because I couldn't swim good enough. But he was long and lanky.
Don't build him up, Don. Don't build him up.
I know, he just could kick my butt when we were there. Hey, Bob, what do you think of the museum? I can't hear you.
The
You're
microphone's
muted, Bob. There you go. Now, still muted. Better move on to Ted before Bob figures it out.
Bob will figure it out, but Ted first. Go ahead.
Hey, Don, I'm curious as to when and to what extent were you able to use computer-aided design in your professional career?
1982. We were the first AE firm in Alabama to use 3D color CAD. And the software was $250,000. Fast forward, that's $1 million. The printer was $22,000. I could buy an S-Class Mercedes for less money than the plotter. We had to work on a 24-hour shift because I couldn't keep buying equipment. It's too expensive. We could draw 3D diagrams. It was the beginning of Intergraph. The first Intel Pentium 1 chip had just been invented. So that started in 83, and it's gone through many stages since.
That's one, too.
Bob, I think you got it fixed.
I think I did. I was fumbling around with the settings. Anyway, I wrote the director of the museum after that article came out about the new design and asked whether it would be finished and ready for us to see during our 60th reunion. And she said, absolutely, that was their goal, to have it ready for us. So we'll all be able to see it then if we last that long. Don, I wanted to say a couple of things. about you. First, your record of achievement is astonishing, stunning. I can't say anything about it that wouldn't be a cliche. So congratulations. But I wanted to say that I think one of the sources of your success and your commitment was visible when you were a diver at Williams. You were always diving behind another diver. Guy Strickland in the beginning, and then what's his name? Billy Gardner, who was the best diver in the entire East Coast Athletic Conference. And he was outstanding, but yet you were still there. You kept on plugging away at it. And I can remember during the meets thinking, my God, he knows he's never going to beat Bill.
Bill was an All-America, absolutely gorgeous. He looked the part. And Bob, our coach, needed a filler. So he took me out of the pool and said, can you do this? And I said, oh, I'll try. So I added a few points here and there, then got to watch Mr. Conway blaze down the pool like some real athlete. It was good discipline to have to be in a pool and get exercise for a time. What is it the case today? 80% of the students at Williams are engaging in some form of athletics, whether it's on a team or just a club level. Is that a correct number?
Sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah, that was good discipline. And certainly good for me. One quick note, advocacy in my profession of architecture is interesting because 80% of our folks live coastal and in big cities. Very few live out in the country. The heartlands have far fewer people, and they're all dyslexic. They're bipolar. Representing them in Congress is interesting because they want to make the world a better place. They tend to be very liberal, progressive, but they work on tips. They work on commission. So they have to hard scramble, figure out how to make a living in a business world. So they would want to have these almost opposing interests. How are you going to have a progressive piece without developing an economic component that worked? And not many architects were really out in the business community, becoming the chairman of the chamber and dealing with business. So they weren't much help. So I was just a good concierge, carry the luggage, frame the message. Virtually every legislation that we wanted to either respond to or promulgate had a Republican and a Democrat. I contributed to both sides, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the Republican side, met with governors, always both. I had no political view personally. I do, but that wasn't important. It was a matter of trying to reflect the needs of my members. And then the real notion was that if we don't make the world a better place to live, work, and play, and look after those that can't look after themselves, and we're not serving the blue ball like we need to. And that hasn't gone away.
Brian, do you want to follow up? Unmute.
I got to unmute. Yeah, I'm sorry. My question goes and it somewhat builds on another part of your career, which is your military. I see a gathering storm of international events, and I see Boeing in trouble. We don't have very many aircraft makers anymore in America. And I wonder if you have views on our preparedness and and they don't seem very efficient. I wonder if you do any advocacy about, geez, we got to get a little more prepared, or am I wrong?
I know information. I don't have an active top secret clearance. I had one higher than that for a long period of time. I don't have one anymore, but I deal with people where I go to briefings. We're in terrible shape. The Chinese are gaining on us enormously. They have 12 shipyards, the smallest of which produces more ship capacity than all of ours combined. We've outsourced that work to other countries, and we don't have that industrial capability internally. What we managed to achieve in World War II was based on our economic might and the ability to quickly turn factories to produce aircraft and tanks and bullets. And we don't have that now. We're at a great disadvantage. It's a good thing that China owns so much of our debt. Otherwise, they would push some more. We're going to see a problem in Taiwan. We're going to see. It's a longer lecture on what they've done to create islands and incursions in Southeast Asia. All of the conflicts over time have dealt with shortage of raw materials and land. That's what caused Japan in the 30s, 35, 6, 7 to try to invade and conquer the Southeast Asian countries that started that portion of the war. So we're in trouble. We have fewer aircraft. It takes us a minimum of 6 or 7 years to produce an aircraft. We produced them in 6 months in World War II. The federal government does not know how to set standards for scope of work. They confuse the issue, and industry has gotten smaller. It's remarkable that Boeing has got into trouble. It's a good thing that Airbus is capable. We have an Airbus plant, oh, by the way, in Mobile, Alabama. But it's a significant problem. We have fewer number of people on active duty than we had prior to World War II, when we were the 17th largest military in the world. That's why the reserve component that I look after and represent are important, because we pull people out of it. It was initially intended to be a strategic force, not an operational one that you had in reserve so that when things hit the fan, you had the opportunity to pull people into play. Most of the troops in World War II were reservists, not active duty. And yet we're stretched thin. People are on constant tours to manage something around the planet, and they're worn out. I held a conference not long ago with 50 of the largest businesses in this country. The Trucking Association, who needs 1 million drivers, Lowe's and Home Depot, that need lots of folks. JP Morgan Chase, I use their chief guy as a co-moderator. Got to find ways to make sure that those guys and gals that are in play, willing to help and produce, that are skilled, where they can work for a time when they're recalled and have a job when they come home. So we're not well suited. Tony bails too quickly. We have mixed messages overseas, have had for a few years. We're in trouble, and we borrowed all the money we need to. It's complicated. There's not an easy out. The defense budget as a percentage of gross national product, which is supposed to get a plus up every year, stays underneath the markers, and we still have continuing resolutions as opposed to a real budget. So we're clunky, we're hobbled, and not very efficient, and I worry about our ability to respond. Sorry about that long answer.
Roger?
Going back to your architecture, do you know Carl Elefante?
Love the man. Yes.
Yes.
He's a running buddy.
He's
Yes.
He'll be here day after tomorrow for a book club. He says hello. I'll tell I told him you were talking.
He is terrific. He was president of the AIA just a few years back. I'd been on the board longer than anybody. He was behind me. My wife began to have difficulty. She had 6 heart procedures in 2.5 years, and so I pulled the plug in 2015. And Carl was president after that, but we were well served. He was from Baltimore originally. Got the best baritone voice of anybody I know, and give him my best.
I will. Thank
Role
you.
model for
I really wanted to say I really appreciate your presentation on the historic preservation work you did.
especially the Tuskegee Airmen. I know you've been to the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Yeah.
So what I want to ask is, what do you think of that building?
That's a complex answer. The designers, I knew people that were architects, the main architects that were competing for that commission. It's an attempt to create a metaphor for the shell. The exhibits are almost painful to watch and to absorb because there's so much. George Miller was the guy who was the architect of the Holocaust Museum. That's a painful museum to go through, however elegantly it is done. Museums that have a message take your breath away, and that's one of them. We've had there's a guy in Montgomery, Brian Stevenson. You might have read about him. He's become internationally famous. He came here as a Harvard trained lawyer defending African Americans who were incarcerated unfairly, defending them on death row. And after struggling for a number of years, and I did his first buildings, he managed to catch the eye of some folks with really deep pockets that gave him tens of millions. And he has turned around and produced a fabulous 2 museums. One that is reminding everyone of the lynchings that occurred in this country. It's a very, very elegant tone poem. And then another museum that it's about the history of slavery in this country. It acknowledges that there was slavery everywhere else on the planet. And this is not, we didn't start this, but it describes it. And it is, you cannot go through that in less than 3 hours. And it absolutely is breathtaking. And so these museums that are telling a hard story, difficult to absorb, make you think, and that's one of them. I can blaze through the American History Museum and enjoy it. And if they move an exhibit, I know they've done it, and those are quick to go through. But that way, the Native American Museum is a lot easier. There's no difficult stories there. It's an attempt to have different tribal entities to brag about those things that are important to them, but it doesn't have the message that the African American Museum does. The fun thing about this, my work with, it is nice when Gee's Bend, for example, the board consists of a group of women who are, some of them are daughters of the original sewing ladies, and several of them were there as primary practitioners that are closer to our age. And it is really heartwarming where they come up and give me a hug, a kiss on the cheek, a guy that looks exactly like the people that just treated them savagely at an earlier time frame. I find that generous spirit very rewarding, and I'll keep looking after them till the cows come home. There's the individuals that are the core leadership group in Montgomery, African Americans that are the foundation board for the church effort are absolutely wonderful people that you would like to have as family. And their chagrin is conveying that history to their progeny that are 2 generations down, that where family cohesiveness has been lost. And that's not a battle I can win. But as long as they'll have me, and they chose me to do this, even though there are African American architects out there in our area, it's a privilege to be able to create opportunities to tell those stories. And the architecture is just the background.
Well, before we break formally, we'll talk about some coming attractions. And Ron, do you want to talk about November, what's coming up?
Yeah.
Sure. The title is Wrestling with the Death Penalty. And whether you're for, against, or neutral about the death penalty, do join a session with Andy Parnes, our classmate, who has been a criminal defense lawyer in Western states for decades. Andy will present 2 cases to us up to the point of determining whether the defendant should be executed. He will then send us into breakout groups for us to decide whether a death penalty or not. When we return with our verdicts in our own groups, Andy will relate what actually occurred and happened. This is daily front page news, Texas being the most recent. So we're asking you to get in the jury box, wrestle with your choices, and engage with your classmates. So wrestling with the death penalty, Andy Parnes, next month.
And that's November 21st, right, Ron?
Yeah, November 21st, right. I wanted to thank everybody too who participated last month in thoughts about where we go for in the future for our Zoom presentations. Had some great ideas. The committee's been meeting and working on it, and will continue to do so. We are not going to have a session in December, but believe that we're going to start with Bill Clendaniel in January on his life and and his discussions of history in Boston, the Boston area. But we really appreciated and are really looking at some of the really great ideas that came forward in our last month's get together, and thank you all for that. Larry, you want to say something there?
No, I agree with you, and we have many good ideas because we're running out of people and stories. So we want to get into
you always have a story to tell.
Topics and ideas.
And Don, thank you very much for all this. It's really, really terrific presentation, and just all the things that you've done in your life in terms of giving to others, and in a very humble way. And we thank you very much for enlightening us. And I think one of the nice things that Alan and I get, and that Harry's gotten too, is we get additional stories as we go through this that are fun. I'm sorry you can't tell them all in the time frame that we're working with, but we thank you for doing what you've done. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I can only add that Don did this when he was pretty badly wounded.
Yep.
Literally, he broke his neck and he's had a painful recovery. And so it's come along very well. And thanks a lot, Don.
God must love fools. I could have died, and I got another lease. So we all are. Everything we have in life is a gift.
We're counting on you to come. We're counting on you to come to the 60th reunion and see that.
I'll be there, and I'll hang on to Bob Conway and get a lesson.
We'll get the two of you to take us through.
Don, I'm counting on you to be there because you said you're going to buy drinks at the bars and tell us more stories. I can drink as long as you can tell stories. If you're buying.
I know that's right.
Yeah, one last comment. I've been asked what I really want to, what do you really want to do when you grow up? Don't do anything. You don't stay in one tribe, but it's not boring. I look forward to seeing you all soon. It's great to see you. I'm surprised at so much gray hair in classes. It's just remarkable.
Don't forget to vote.
All right. Thank you all.
See you again soon.